talk about the planning board member and address what I just mentioned. I mean, not what Chuck mentioned.
If you'd like, I can start on that one. You can either or.
If you want to.
The requirements of our code, since this came up as part of what I've been doing with the attorneys looking into our code, is that the planning board itself, as just a very brief overview, has 4 classes of people that sit on it. Class 1 is the mayor. Class 2 and 3 is an employee and council member. Or his representative. Class 2 and 3 is an employee of the town and a council member, and Class 4 are members of the general public. According to the code and statute of the state, one of those Class 4 members is to be a member of the Environmental Commission. And what that means is one of the members here becomes a member of the planning board, and as opposed to regular members of the planning board in Class 4 positions that serve for 4 years, this particular member would serve a 3-year term on the planning board to match the 3-year term on the Environmental Commission. Now that is, in very verbose language, the requirement of our code and statute. What we have done in this town for the past several decades, and this goes back as far as I could tell to the 90s and probably before that, is that a member of the planning board came here as a non-voting liaison to the Environmental Commission. And that is not correct according to code. It is not correct according to statute. It just is not correct. So we have endeavored to set things on the correct path. When we did this, before Mr. Gillers was appointed, there was not an empty position on this commission, and there was not an empty position on the planning board. So the first opportunity where that happens is on June 30th is the last day when both boards have an opening where someone can be reappointed, and that will be the first opportunity in order to get this done correctly. Now, council is aware that that means that there's a couple-month period where we are, in essence, not ideally set according to code, but we have not been set according to code or statute for several decades. So on July 1st, with all due speed, we hope to get that done correctly, and we will, for the first time in several decades, be done according to statute.
So are you saying that we, as the Environmental Commission, should appoint somebody?
No. It is appointed, a member of this board is appointed to the planning board. The council appoints members of the planning board, and one of the members of this board will be whom the council picks from in order to appoint that person to one of the Class 4 positions.
And the Environmental Commission does not have any say in who's chosen?
No. The statute lays out who...
It's the manager.
The manager appoints the Environmental Commission.
So whoever the manager has in the Environmental Commission, the mayor and council have to pick from whoever's on the Environmental Commission to put that one of those people on it. So they're going to have to talk to whoever it is, and they're going to say, would you want to be on the planning board? Because that's a big commitment to be on the planning board in addition to the Environmental Commission. That's not a position that you take lightly.
How many meetings?
Not that the Environmental Commission is one that you take lightly either, but planning board meets more than once a month.
Generally, at least once a month, sometimes more,
Right.
depending on the agendas.
I'm just a little baffled as to why the Environmental Commission would not have a say as to who our liaison is.
It's not a liaison position, it's actually a member. It's a member of both.
And this is a state statute. You would have to take it up with the folks in Trenton as to how this is done. It's state statute on who appoints.
It's written in the most convoluted way possible because it depending on whether
We
you
get a
have.
copy of that statute for next meeting.
Absolutely.
It's in our code. I can forward it to you.
If you could forward it to me, I appreciate it.
So, good evening, everyone. Thank you for making some time for me to speak. I wanted to just review a couple of things with the commission. This is sort of what I was going to talk about at the last meeting. I had another month to prepare. You know, I don't want to be pedantic, and I don't want to say things to everyone on this commission. You're all volunteers. I understand what that means, because in my own town, I'm on my Board of Education, so I know what it means to give back to the community. It's a great thing that you're doing. You all know that on your website, there's a whole list of of the responsibilities and duties. And I think Dr. Powers was referring, or maybe Mr. Solon was referring to what those are, that they're set by statute. And actually, the website actually mimics what's in the statute. So, anytime you had a question about that, that's where I would go. I mean, that's the first thing that I looked at, because I know how good our website is, and I know that this information is out there. So, the one thing that I want to make clear, and I had this conversation with one of your members after the last meeting who called me, was you are a public body, and you know that. And so therefore, and I want to start off by saying, before I even get into the legal part of what I'm going to talk about, is that I'm here at the request of the manager, Mr. Kaczynski. He asked me to come and speak to the Environmental Commission. He's asked me to come and speak to different boards and different commissions in the town. Sometimes it's just the chair, sometimes it's the entire body, depending on what he perceives as something that he thinks needs to be adjusted in how things are being done. I'll use that term. And I've heard there's been a lot of discussion about whether me as the township attorney, whether I represent the Environmental Commission or not. The answer is clearly in the code and also under state law. The answer is yes, because while you are an autonomous commission, you are appointed by the manager and you serve underneath at his pleasure. And at the end of the day, I'm his lawyer. And that's in our township charter, that's in our township code. And so he asked me to come here as the lawyer for the town, and the lawyer specifically for him in this capacity to have this conversation. So I'm going to keep it as brief as possible, because there's really only three things that I want to talk about. The first thing is the Open Public Meetings Act, and that was alluded to earlier by one of the speakers. Clearly, these are public meetings. They're subject to the Open Public Meetings Act. And so you are entitled. I know that Madam Chairwoman had said to me at the last meeting that you've never wanted to close session before. And that's not uncommon for something other than a planning board or zoning board or even a mayor and council. I mean, closed sessions are not things that are taken lightly. They're a very limited set of rules as to why you go into closed session. What I wanted to talk about with the commission at the last meeting in closed session, I'm going to tell you now, because now Mr. Gillers is up here, was the appointment of the new member. And that's what we consider a personnel matter, and that's one of the aspects that is permitted to be discussed in closed session. But since it's already occurred, I don't need to talk about it anymore. But I want you to understand that under the Open Public Meetings Act, that's why I come to the meeting and made the request to speak in closed session. The other part of that is that your communications with one another, and the Open Public Records Act, so that you all know that anything that you say in your capacity as a member of the Environmental Commission is subject to the Open Public Records Act in New Jersey, which is, in my opinion, like the companion statute to the Open Public Meetings Act. It's supposed to promote transparency in government, and you're supposed to be able to request reasonably available records. Certain things take a little more time than others, depending on what the request is. Certainly in Teaneck, we have no lack, as you, I'm sure, read in the newspaper before, of requests for open public records. And that's something that I just want to remind everyone to be careful about. And when I talked to the manager, he asked that I remind you. But the last thing...
May I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Does that, John, does that mean, for example, if Tina sends an email to all of us, are we allowed to answer her?
The answer to that, if it's in the capacity of the Environmental Commission, my answer would be the same as it is generally to the council when something like that happens, which is do not reply all. Meaning when you engage in an email discourse with a body that's, when it's constituted as a formal public body, that can be then considered a violation of what we call the Sunshine Law or the Open Public Meetings Act, because now you are discussing it at a concert, if you would, like you would at a meeting that you would formally open, via email, and that's been called by the courts like a backdoor way to try to have a meeting, and it's not considered appropriate, and it's a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act, and something that I regularly counsel all my clients, with Teaneck or otherwise, when not to do. It's not wise. So there's nothing wrong with the chair sending an email to everybody. That's okay. That's a single communication. There just shouldn't be discourse back and forth between the entire group. That's why, again, when I send something to like the mayor council, it always says do not reply all.
Individual responses to the original email from the chair, is that appropriate?
That's okay. that's okay, because that's not a group conversation, if you would, that's a one-on-one conversation. And again, in the way our laws are, and the way our commissions work, it's based on if you have a quorum. So if you have a quorum in the group of the communication, at that point then it can be considered a public meeting, and that's where you might have an issue with somebody trying to challenge what you're doing, or saying that you're trying to be outside of what's noticed and what's scheduled.
And then, just to follow up, just for my clarification, since I chair a advisory board, which is not a commission, that this rule, this issue is not an issue like the PPRAB, how do I,
It's not, I'll put it this way, it's not as direct of an issue as a statutory commission or a statutory body that like a planning board or a zoning board, but I would still counsel you that it's unwise in any kind of a public forum to have those kind of group communications where you have regularly scheduled meetings and the public is supposed to be able to come and hear what you have to talk about. I just think that as a general rule of thumb, that's not wise. And the other last piece I want to just mention on emails before I get to my last point is that understand that if you commingle your emails, meaning your emails from your personal account with your emails regarding the Environmental Commission. So if you use, I don't know, I forget what your email is, not sure, but if it's at Hotmail, and that's your regular email that you use for your daily life, and your Environmental Commission emails are coming there, that can create an issue where someone can Oprah your personal emails, and then you might have to create what's called a privilege law, and it becomes a whole process by which you have to go through, and sometimes with the court, it actually happened with a freeholder in Orgen County who's a lawyer whose emails from his law firm, if I remember correctly, were commingled with his county emails, and there was a lawsuit over whether or not they were able to get access to those emails. So I always suggest to anyone who's got a public position, create a separate Hotmail, Gmail account for, behempful at, Teaneck, behempfulteaneck at gmail.com or whatever, just so, and use that for your Environmental Commission correspondence. I know it creates a little bit of extra work, but it protects your communications and your private communications that you may not want to have exposed to people who are looking from the outside. Answer the question?
I had one, but you answered it. Thank you.
I think it's for, does the town provide us emails, or we're supposed to?
No, there was a lot of talk about that at the board meetings that we had, and we decided not to do that. It was.
Okay. If we're being advised to have a professional account for this purpose, it seems like.
And
I will speak, I'll speak with our clerk and manager. The issue when it came up before was generally with advisory boards, which, as the attorney said, have different requirements under OPMA and OPRA, which is the Open Public Meetings Act and the Open Public Records Act. Advisory boards are not subject to the rules in the same way as commissions, but I do think your point is well taken, that since we are a commission that is required, and that your commingling of emails would be subject, like the attorney said, to Oprah, I think it would be advisable, could be. I think it would be advisable to, at minimum, have township accounts offered to every member of the commission, so I will bring that up with them.
This is the mayor orders designate.
Open Public Meetings Act governing the rules on meetings, and the Open Public Records Act governing documents and various other matters.
And James, what the conclusion was there.
So, and the last piece that I wanted to just review with the commission, and again, I apologize, because I know you guys do such great salutary work. I love it, I'm a big pro-environment person in my personal life. This is something that is clearly taken away from your time of dealing with the environment, and I do apologize for that. But I do want to make one last point, because this is actually really the reason why the manager asked me to come speak, which is about public statements that come from the Environmental Commission, and what you are allowed to do and not allowed to do. I know about a year ago, I think Mr. Rupp came and spoke about that to the commission and about what your functions are and what your roles are. But there were some communications that came out over the last couple of months that were concerning to the manager, and he asked me just to remind you that you're an agency of the Township of Teaneck, you're appointed by the township, and that the charter of the township, and this is really the key language here, it comes right out of the state statute that forms the type of government that we have in Teaneck. It's 40:69A-88 if you want to read it, and I'll say that slowly, 40:69A-88. It vests all powers of policy in the township council. In other words, all the powers of the municipality and the determinations of all matters of policy are vested in the council except as otherwise provided in the statute, which is not provided with really anything else that is applicable here. So any policy recommendation from any board or any commission has to be directed to the township council for their adoption. In other words, the environmental commission or the planning board or the zoning board, they can't adopt policies that govern the town. So if you want to say, we think plastic bags should be banned, or we think straws should be banned, I'm in favor of all these things, personally. But that means that you can recommend that to the council. You can send them a whole manifesto that says this is what we want, this is what we think is good, this is what is good for the environment, and will be productive for the township of Teaneck. But you can't make a public statement saying, we, the environmental commission, adopt this policy. And that goes hand in hand with communicating with outside agencies, whether it's the state of New Jersey, whether it's a legislator, whether it is any other body in which you're representing yourself as the environmental commission. I think, if I remember correctly, that's what occurred that spurred the manager to come speak to me.
Because we had a meeting about this already years ago.
That's what I was referring to earlier.
That's the incident.
I think there was another one after that happened.
I don't know about that one.
Yeah, it was there was another email that went out because again, I wouldn't have been asked to come if there wasn't something different.
Can I ask Dean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So again, you have a lot of different functions and authority under the state statute that are, like I said, it's laid out on the website in terms of the recommendations and the plans that you can submit and the recommendations regarding open space, et cetera. And you know, I would encourage, because I'm not sure how many of our commissions or boards are doing this, but a lot of them are required by statute to submit an annual report to the mayor and council laying out what your recommendations are, because that's something that they will take seriously and they will review seriously, and if it's something that they agree with, we'll act upon. But the most important thing is to recognize in your function as a commission, you don't speak for the town. The only body that can speak for the town is the council. Everybody else has to make recommendations. So, that's it.
And clarification, I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So, as a town-appointed commission, we have the power we are vested with the power to make statements and make policy advice. Is that correct?
To make
recommendations to the council.
Correct.
You don't have the power to make public statements or public recommendations without going through the proper channels through the council.
Actually, meetings, you're entitled to make public statements about what you're discussing and say that this is what I personally agree with or what we agree with as a body. But ultimately, in terms of putting it out to the public at large, this is the policy of the township of Teaneck. It's not the environmental commission that adopts that policy, it's the township, it's the mayor and council that adopt that policy. So the way that it works and the way it should work is the environmental commission would come up with the formula, what you think is the right policy, and you would send that to the mayor and council saying, we ask that you adopt this policy on behalf of the township. So the mayor and council then are going to have their own discussion about whether they think that that policy should be adopted or not.
John?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Would it be kosher for us to then to say that we made a recommendation of a certain policy to the council and just leave it at that?
To who?
Anyone?
Like in your minutes or like on,
In our minutes, to the suburbanite, to the record, you have it just say, we made a recommendation.
I'm not going to tell you what you can say publicly. That's your First Amendment right. But for individually,
Just
I'm talking about as far as, listen, if you put something in writing to the council, that's a document, that's a public document. If you send a letter to the council, to the manager, saying that after our meeting on, February 20th, or the 19th, I think today is right, and the 19th, we discussed the issue of banning plastic bags, and we make a recommendation that this should be done. If someone asks you, did you make that recommendation? A, there's a letter that quantifies it, and B, I don't want you to lie.
Okay.
But again, my general thing is that you defer that, that's what the environmental commission's position was. It's now in the hands of the mayor and council to make a determination as to whether or not the town wants to adopt that.
So, for clarity, if the environmental commission adopts resolution X for whatever it is, and Phil wants to go in the suburbanite and say, I am a member of the environmental commission, and when I was there, we adopted resolution X, that's one thing. But to put a letter saying, as the Environmental Commission of Teaneck, we advocate for X would be improper since you're speaking as a board instead of as an individual.
I thought that's what I said, but.
Same question. When we make a recommendation, do we send it to the mayor? Do we send it to the township manager? Who exactly are we reporting to?
I think the right process is to send it to the manager, who will bring it to the council's attention. The manager is the CEO of the town, you know, and his job is to run the town. So, you know, he's the right conduit to get that. He also is a person under our code who appoints everybody here, so I think that that's the appropriate body. You know, he has an obligation, obviously, to do that, to bring it to the council. He knows that, and he will do that.
Do you CC council, or you just send it to?
Listen, you can go either way. I mean, that's really a choice that individually you make.
But I mean, legally, it doesn't make.
Legally, it makes no difference whether you copy the council. I can tell you that practically, the council will see it, because Dean is very, very diligent about making sure that the council gets notice of every communication that comes to them in that kind of department or commission. No more questions? I wish
And to be clear, since it was brought up, you're our attorney, right? You're not here to subvert the board, you're here to advise the board?
Correct.
And the advice you gave is something that you were planning to give before, and it was a personnel issue. So, I mean, look, we get people grandstand a lot, but you're our attorney. And, you know, a game for the general public, you're here to advise, and there are legal reasons why it had to be in closed session.
I don't play those types of games, Councilman. You know, I mean, this is, I'm a professional. You know, there are people in the back of this room who like to heckle and make jokes and think it's all funny. But you know, this is not funny. You know, I'm taking time out of my schedule to be here, just like you're taking time out of your schedule to be here. You know, like I said, I was asked by the manager, the CEO of Teaneck, and said there were issues that he was concerned about that he wanted me to raise with the commission. So that's why I came last time, that's why I'm here tonight. And again, if there are ever any questions, and as I say this in council meetings all the time, I invite people to contact me. I have an open email address, I have an open phone number. Anybody can call me or email me at any time. So,
May I ask you a question?
absolutely.
It's not on what you've talked about. I believe the planning board is supposed to include the environmental commission when they do a review of the master plan or an update or whatever. We haven't had that for at least 3 years. Did you have any idea why we don't have involvement from the planning board?
I don't, because they're a separate autonomous body with their own attorney. So I haven't had that conversation with their attorney. That's something I can certainly raise with him and ask him why the environmental commission has not been brought in to discuss whatever their reviews are. You know, but that's not something it's never been raised to my attention, and certainly the attorney from the planning board has never had. I've never had that conversation with him, but I have no problem discussing it and finding out what his position is and what the money is.
That being said, come July 1st, come hell or high water, a member of this commission is going to be on the planning board, who will get a packet every single meeting with everything that the planning board is doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair? This is sort of administrative. When we do the agenda, is it possible to do number 5 agenda additions to somewhere else? It should be agenda additions or changes, in case we want to leave anything around, in case we want to add anything. Like you were saying, I would like to add something. Well, I don't think I can do it.
Let's do it as agenda additions.
So it'll be